whether it's tied to Amazon or another nationwide company, using fake vans that on the outside will look just like the real thing, and so they can blend in.
An ordinary Amazon package landed on a doorstep in suburban Ohio. Nothing unusual, no warning signs, no reason to hesitate. Just another brown box in a country that receives millions of them every single day. It was addressed to a college student. Inside were supposed to be textbooks for the upcoming semester, the kind of delivery that barely earns a second glance. The box was brought into the kitchen, cut open casually, packing paper pulled aside. Then something didn't add up. Beneath a neatly wrapped psychology textbook was not empty space, not protective filler, but a dense, vacuum-sealed brick of white powder pressed tight in plastic. Solid, heavy, completely out of place. Authorities later confirmed what the family had already begun to suspect. It was pure cocaine. Street value, tens of thousands of dollars. Investigators determined the drugs were never meant to arrive at that address. The shipment was the result of a labeling failure inside a cartel-controlled ordering scheme that had been operating undetected. One small administrative mistake, one incorrect tag in a fraudulent system, and suddenly, a quiet suburban kitchen became the first crack in something much larger. Because this was not a random accident. What federal investigators began uncovering in the aftermath was described as one of the most sophisticated criminal exploitations of U.S. commerce in modern history. Evidence suggested that major Mexican trafficking organizations had been embedding illegal narcotics into legitimate-looking Amazon orders, routing drugs through the same warehousing and delivery infrastructure trusted by millions of Americans. Not by hacking the system, not by overpowering it, but by studying it. The immediate question was unavoidable. If a single labeling error caused cocaine to appear inside an ordinary family's home, how many similar shipments had reached their destinations without incident? How many had been opened in dorm rooms, apartments, and suburban homes without anyone realizing what had moved through the same network? When federal authorities stepped back to examine the broader environment, they focused on one reality: scale. Amazon operates one of the most advanced logistics systems ever constructed. Tens of millions of packages move daily through fulfillment centers, regional sorting hubs, and last-mile delivery stations spanning dense metropolitan areas and remote rural towns alike. The system is engineered for speed, efficiency, and volume. It is not engineered for suspicion. For consumers, an Amazon box carries a built-in assumption of legitimacy. The order was placed, payment processed, tracking provided, delivery confirmed, a closed commercial loop. Unlike anonymous parcels or irregular freight shipments, Amazon packages do not trigger alarm. They are opened casually on kitchen counters, in student housing, and on front porches across the country. That trust was built over years of consistent performance. And criminal networks noticed. Not because the company was involved, not because the system was designed to facilitate crime, but because the system worked reliably, predictably, at enormous scale. At the same time this logistical efficiency became embedded in American daily life, the country was confronting a parallel crisis. Synthetic drugs, particularly fentanyl and methamphetamine, sourced through Mexican trafficking organizations, were driving an unprecedented wave of overdose deaths. According to data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, synthetic opioids became the leading cause of overdose fatalities nationwide, responsible for more than 70,000 deaths annually in recent years. This was not confined to border regions. It was not abstract. It was unfolding in neighborhoods, schools, workplaces, and suburban communities across the United States. From a federal investigative standpoint, these two realities eventually converged. Trafficking organizations were not simply transporting narcotics through traditional cross-border smuggling corridors. Reporting by Reuters and other outlets has documented how major groups such as the Sinaloa Cartel and CJNG adapted their methods, increasingly shifting toward domestic distribution strategies that reduced reliance on high-risk border crossings and inspection points. Instead of forcing their way through enforcement barriers, they began analyzing civilian infrastructure. They studied systems built on speed, systems built on volume, systems built on trust. Law enforcement officials have emphasized a critical distinction. Amazon was not complicit. The company did not knowingly transport illegal substances, nor were its systems constructed to enable criminal activity. What was exploited were structural characteristics common to modern logistics networks: massive throughput, operational automation, minimal inspection requirements due to scale, and a distributed workforce across numerous facilities. The Ohio package was not just a delivery error, it was a signal. And what investigators uncovered next suggested this was only the visible edge of a much larger adaptation inside America's own commercial arteries. These vulnerabilities existed for one reason. The system was engineered for legitimate commerce, not criminal misuse. Investigators eventually stopped viewing this as a weakness of a single corporation. What they were witnessing was something more strategic. Cartel networks were no longer treating the United States as territory to penetrate. They were treating it as infrastructure to operate within. Civilian supply chains became camouflage. Drugs moved quietly alongside textbooks, electronics, clothing, and household goods. No secret tunnels, no high-speed chases, just packages flowing through a system built on speed and trust. That realization changed the entire direction of the investigation. The central question was no longer how narcotics crossed the border. It was how they circulated once inside the country. A logistics framework designed for convenience had, without its knowledge, been converted into a distribution corridor for lethal substances. And that led to a defining question, one that continues to challenge policymakers and enforcement agencies. What happens when a network built on reliability becomes the most efficient drug delivery system in the country? Not because it collapsed, but because it functioned exactly as designed. From the perspective of organizations like the Sinaloa Cartel and CJNG, the issue of cross-border movement had largely been solved decades ago. The modern challenge was domestic dispersion. Law enforcement pressure along traditional trafficking routes had intensified. Border inspections had improved. Surveillance had expanded. So the focus shifted. Instead of forcing product through controlled choke points, trafficking groups began studying American infrastructure itself. What they saw was scale without suspicion. Millions of packages shipped daily. Throughput so massive that inspecting even a small percentage would disrupt the entire system. Operational efficiency that depended on speed, not scrutiny. Federal officials have repeatedly acknowledged that high-volume commercial shipping creates blind spots. A 2023 U.S. Government Accountability Office report warned that transnational drug networks increasingly rely on domestic distribution channels to reduce exposure to border enforcement, particularly for fentanyl and methamphetamine already inside U.S. territory. The second advantage was visibility, or more accurately, the absence of it. Legitimate Amazon packages do not generate alarm. They arrive with printed labels, tracking numbers, recognizable branding. They move through fulfillment centers, delivery trucks, and residential neighborhoods as part of everyday life. Unlike hidden vehicle compartments or underground tunnels, these shipments blended seamlessly into civilian routines. Investigators later described this. Dynamic as low-risk, high-volume movement, the ideal operating environment for modern trafficking networks. The third vulnerability was human access. Amazon employs hundreds of thousands of workers nationwide, large facilities, demanding labor conditions, constant turnover. Federal prosecutors have documented how criminal organizations increasingly attempt to recruit, bribe, or intimidate individuals within logistics, trucking, and warehousing sectors. A 2024 Justice Department assessment referred to this tactic as workforce infiltration, gaining internal access through credentials rather than force. No need to breach security fences, just badge access, shift schedules, routine tasks. The concealment method itself was simple. Drugs embedded inside legitimate orders, cocaine taped beneath textbooks, fentanyl hidden within electronics packaging, methamphetamine sealed inside common household goods. Once packed, these items entered standard fulfillment channels and traveled across state lines without interruption. No alarms triggered, no weapons displayed, no visible disruption. From an operational standpoint, everything moved exactly as the system was engineered to move. For federal agents, this represented a fundamental evolution in organized crime strategy. Cartels were no longer attempting to overpower enforcement mechanisms. They were merging with legitimate commerce, using trust as operational cover. As one investigator summarized in court filings, the network functioned because it did not appear criminal. It looked like employment, it looked like routine logistics, it looked like commerce. There were no armed takeovers of facilities, no dramatic infiltration scenes. Access was achieved through time cards, employee badges, and authorized credentials. A trusted delivery framework had been repurposed into a concealed narcotics corridor, running through the center of the United States without drawing attention. When the cocaine concealed inside, the Ohio textbook was traced backward through digital records and shipping data. The FBI stopped treating the case as an isolated error. They began mapping a system, And the first battlefield was not physical, it was digital. Federal agents obtained warrants to examine the customer account responsible for the Ohio shipment. What they uncovered immediately elevated the case. The account had been created using stolen identity data. Payments were routed through prepaid debit cards. Purchase history showed dozens of small, low-cost orders placed over time. Each shipment was sent to a different address. Many of those addresses were short-term rentals, vacant properties, houses with no established residents. To investigators, this pattern was not random. It matched a known distribution model: small, dispersed deliveries designed to avoid attention while moving product in volume. One address in the Columbus suburbs ultimately exposed the structure behind the scheme. When agents entered the rental property, there were no signs of ordinary living. No furniture, no personal belongings, no stocked kitchen. The house was operational, not residential. Inside, they found stacks of flattened Amazon boxes, packaging remnants, and significant quantities of cocaine and methamphetamine already portioned for redistribution. Law enforcement sources later confirmed that the narcotics had arrived over several weeks through multiple separate deliveries, each one processed as a standard consumer shipment. From the outside, the house appeared empty. In reality, it functioned as a regional staging hub directly fed by routine delivery routes. The arrests at that location marked a decisive turning point. Within days, one of the individuals receiving the packages agreed to cooperate. His testimony expanded the scope beyond Ohio. He described similar properties operating in multiple states, each supplied through different Amazon facilities, yet following the same logistical pattern. Federal prosecutors later confirmed that this cooperation allowed investigators to connect previously isolated cases across the Midwest, the South, and the West Coast into a coordinated distribution network. The Department of Justice has since warned that cartel-linked cells often operate using this decentralized structure, dozens of low-visibility addresses distributing risk and preventing a single seizure from collapsing the system. As analysts built a geographic map of suspicious activity, a pattern began to emerge. Certain Amazon fulfillment centers and delivery stations appeared repeatedly in internal FBI reports. Suspicious orders were clustering around specific facilities. Investigators described these as logistical crossroads. Shipping data indicated that compromised deliveries were not randomly distributed across the national network. They were disproportionately associated with particular nodes, suggesting internal access rather than external interference. A justice. Department briefing in early 2024 identified cartel infiltration of logistics hubs as an increasing concern, especially in industries designed for speed and automation rather than granular inspection. By this phase, the case had evolved beyond individual packages. Agents were no longer tracking boxes. They were analyzing infrastructure. What began with a family opening a textbook shipment had grown into a multi-state investigation, examining how criminal organizations could embed themselves inside trusted commercial systems without immediate detection. Public court filings and reporting from Reuters emphasized a key point. This was not a story about a single rogue employee or one negligent facility. It was about repetition, coordination, scale. As the operation expanded, a critical question hovered over every data chart and warehouse log reviewed by analysts. If one facility could be quietly compromised without triggering alarms, how many others might be vulnerable? Traditional surveillance methods were no longer sufficient. The network was too dispersed, the data volume too large, so investigators changed tactics. Rather than following individual shipments, they began studying behavioral patterns across the system itself. Working alongside Amazon's internal security teams, federal analysts gained access to anonymized shipping data spanning millions of transactions over multiple years. They were not searching for a specific package. They were searching for anomalies. Gradually, a behavioral fingerprint began to form. Legitimate customers typically purchase items for personal use. They keep what they order. Their buying patterns reflect predictable consumer needs. The suspicious accounts followed a different rhythm. Small orders, frequent deliveries, short-term addresses, no long-term retention of goods. Geography added another layer. These abnormal purchase patterns were not evenly distributed nationwide. They concentrated around specific fulfillment centers and delivery stations. That clustering suggested something more than coincidence. It suggested access from inside the system. And for federal investigators, that possibility elevated the case from organized trafficking to systemic infiltration. Analysts paused when the next implication became clear. If narcotics were being inserted during packing, this was not a shipping anomaly. It was insider manipulation. The Justice Department has repeatedly warned that criminal organizations increasingly target logistics and warehouse personnel for this exact reason. One compromised employee inside a high-volume facility can influence thousands of outbound shipments without triggering immediate alarms. As additional data was processed, the pattern hardened. Investigators identified 89 Amazon facilities across multiple states that appeared consistently in connection with suspicious purchasing clusters, abnormal return rates, and linked distribution addresses. These sites became priority surveillance targets. Financial analysis added another layer. The same customer accounts were tied to complex money flows, prepaid cards, layered shell accounts, and cryptocurrency wallets. Funds ultimately traced back to networks already associated with cartel-linked operations. Court filings later described the scale as staggering. Over approximately 4 years, the distribution network was responsible for moving an estimated $3.4 billion worth of fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine within the United States. Wiretaps and financial monitoring confirmed what the data patterns had already suggested. Intercepted conversations referenced shipment timing, shift rotations, packing station access, and internal scheduling. The language sounded indistinguishable from legitimate logistics coordination. There was no discussion of border crossings, no references to smuggling corridors. The product was already inside the country. It was moving alongside ordinary consumer goods. The Department of Homeland Security later characterized this method as one of the most dangerous evolutions in cartel strategy, not because of force, but because of concealment. Lethal substances embedded inside systems designed for trust and operational speed. The most unsettling conclusion at this stage was not corporate complicity. According to federal filings, Amazon did not knowingly transport narcotics. Its systems were functioning as designed. The difference was that criminal networks understood those systems at an operational level. They studied procedural gaps. They mapped internal workflows. They identified where inspection was limited by necessity. By the end of the analytical phase, one fact was no longer debated. The network had been exploited. The pressing question became speed. How quickly could authorities intervene before the same infrastructure was used again, quietly, efficiently, at national scale? Just before dawn, routine operations across dozens of facilities were interrupted. As warehouse shifts prepared to begin and delivery trucks lined up for loading, federal agents moved simultaneously across multiple time zones. Reporting later, confirmed by the Department of Justice, described a synchronized operation involving thousands of personnel from the FBI, DEA, ICE, Homeland Security Investigations, and local law enforcement partners. 89 facilities were targeted. The objective was containment. Investigators needed to shut down access points everywhere at once before any internal alert could cascade through the system. Inside the buildings, arrests unfolded rapidly. Warehouse workers, delivery drivers, supervisors, external coordinators connected to logistics scheduling. Court documents later clarified that many of those detained were not cartel leaders. They were access enablers, individuals controlling shift patterns, packing stations, badge permissions, and workflow routing. This was where the breach had occurred, and this was where it was being reversed. Reuters described the action as one of the largest coordinated law enforcement operations involving a private logistics network in U.S. history. As agents advanced deeper into packaging zones, evidence was discovered in plain operational areas. Boxes labeled for delivery contained fentanyl pills, methamphetamine, and cocaine concealed beneath legitimate merchandise. In several facilities, narcotics were positioned near conveyor belts awaiting sealing and outbound scanning. No hidden bunkers, no secret chambers, just active fulfillment lines. Federal officials later confirmed that multiple tons of narcotics were seized during the raids, including substances directly linked to overdose investigations nationwide. But what unsettled investigators most was proximity. Post-raid shipping analysis revealed that tens of thousands of packages over several years had transported drugs embedded inside legitimate consumer orders. Many had already reached their destinations. Ordinary addresses, ordinary neighborhoods, ordinary households. The scale was no longer theoretical. It was measurable. Many of those packages were delivered to addresses with no criminal history. In most cases, cartel operatives intercepted the shipments before customers ever opened them. In others, like the Ohio textbook delivery that exposed the operation, the system failed by minutes, sometimes by seconds. That margin was all that separated routine commerce from catastrophe. The DEA later warned that this distribution model dramatically increased both the speed and reach of narcotics movement compared to traditional trafficking routes. No border bottlenecks, no highway interdictions, just domestic circulation at industrial scale. By the end of that week, federal authorities had dismantled what investigators described as a $3.4 billion domestic narcotics web operating over roughly 4 years. Amazon announced immediate internal security, adjustments, and pledged full cooperation. Congressional oversight committees began examining how such infiltration could persist for years without detection. But inside federal briefings, there was no celebration. The operation succeeded because it was synchronized, precise, and immediate. Any delay would have allowed the network to adapt. And adaptation is what modern criminal organizations do best. Officials later emphasized a reality that shaped the entire case. These networks evolve as fast as the systems designed to stop them. That leaves one uncomfortable question behind. If the operation had continued for just a few more months, quietly blending into daily commerce, how many more shipments would have crossed the country? How many more communities would have been affected before anyone realized what was moving through the system? When the final evidence was logged and the last facility cleared, the case represented more than arrests and seizure totals. From a national perspective, it was a warning. Modern security threats are no longer limited to borders, ports, or remote smuggling corridors. Federal officials have repeatedly stated that organized criminal networks now study the most trusted systems in American life and look for structural weaknesses. For decades, enforcement focused on stopping drugs at entry points. In this case, the border was almost irrelevant. The narcotics were already inside the country, moving through American infrastructure with American tracking numbers and consumer labels. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, transnational trafficking organizations have increasingly shifted toward domestic distribution methods specifically to reduce exposure to customs inspections and border controls, particularly for fentanyl and methamphetamine. This investigation showed how refined that shift had become. Amazon, once aware of the scope, implemented expanded screening measures, enhanced monitoring of packing operations, and deeper coordination with federal authorities. Congressional hearings examined how a logistics network optimized for speed could be manipulated without immediate detection. Yet lawmakers and investigators alike acknowledged a broader issue. This was not solely about one company. Reuters reporting noted that logistics, trucking, and warehousing sectors across the country have become high-value targets for organized crime because they offer scale, anonymity, and national reach. And that raises a larger concern. If one of the most advanced logistics systems in the world could be exploited with such precision, how many other high-speed infrastructures remain vulnerable? E-commerce platforms, shipping networks, payment processors, gig-based delivery services, all are built for volume and convenience, not for stopping every transaction. Criminal organizations understand this structural tension. They exploit it methodically, quietly, and at scale. The central lesson of this case is simple and deeply unsettling. Trust, when left unprotected, can be weaponized. Millions of Americans opened boxes at their front doors without hesitation, and they had no reason to suspect anything unusual. Yet behind that routine, lethal substances were moving across the country at industrial levels. According to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, synthetic opioids like fentanyl remain the leading cause of overdose deaths in the United States, a statistic that gives this case weight far beyond logistics and data analysis. Law enforcement stopped one network, but others are watching, learning, adjusting. The battle is no longer just about intercepting traffickers. It is about safeguarding the infrastructure modern life depends on. This is exactly what State Tone investigates: the hidden systems, the pressure points, and the moments when trust, power, and crime collide behind the surface. If you want deeper breakdowns of operations like this and the unseen structures shaping national security, subscribe and stay with State Tone. And now, one question remains. In a world built on speed and convenience, who should carry the greatest responsibility when trusted systems are exploited from the inside?